Okay, so if we're done waiting, we're going to go ahead with this panel. Thank you everyone for coming. I know that people may have busy schedules, even if it's the summer. So I think this will be a really good opportunity to learn about Victoria and Tanya and kind of the possible routes you can go into when you're in STEM or specifically in engineering. If you don't mind, Victoria, we'll start with you for going in alphabetical order. So as a brief introduction, Victoria Arias is a second-year student in mechanical engineering PhD program at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. While she did her bachelor's in applied math in California, after that, she took a year off to participate in 4 consecutive internships at NASA Langley Research Center, where she studied space radiation shielding materials. And now she's also a NASA Space Tech Graduate Research Opportunities Fellow. And through that program, she's studying heat shield materials. Throughout her career, Victoria hopes to continue to contribute towards materials and technologies for safe transport and habitats for future long-term space missions. So she's our resident NASA engineer for today. And with that, I think I'll let Victoria take it away.
All right. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. Let me share my screen here. Hopefully everyone can see that. Okay, cool. So, this picture here, it looks pretty intimidating, and it looks like I actually flew something, but I didn't. Unfortunately, it was just kind of like a fun photo shoot that they had for us interns at NASA Langley Research Center. Um, so we basically got to play dress up and then take pictures. So it was really fun though. That's my team, my research team. I believe this was spring 2018. So a couple years back. Let's see. So first, just so everyone's a little bit more familiar about me, aside from, being a STEM superhero, so I grew up in Fresno, California, which is like dead center geographically of California, in the middle of everything and at the same time in the middle of nowhere. But that's home. That's me as a preschooler. Uh, wasn't super excited about STEM that quite early, um, but eventually grew into it. Talk more about that, I think, later. Um, so I have 2 cats. Cosmo on the left is my black cat, and then Hubble on the right, gray cat. And of course, they are space names. So I also really enjoy rock climbing. Rock climbing is like one of my top hobbies. Another hobby of mine is playing the cello. I played cello for many years. This is actually a photo on the top there of me and my like high school quartet. We actually like would go around and play like at weddings and like little local festivals and stuff. So um, really a great group of people. And then I have a huge family on both sides. So the top photo with all these lovely people are like my family on my mom's side, and then on the bottom is my family on my dad's side in Mexico. So yes, that is a little bit about me. So this is sort of like the timeline, I guess you could say. Really, you could say that my journey, of my academic journey, of course, started before high school, but really this is like maybe the turning point for me was when I graduated high school in 2014 from Buchanan High School. Um, I was applying to all the top schools that I could possibly apply to because that was just like the drive that I had. That was just like, you know, I knew from a young age that I wanted to go to like, a really great school and, you know, get a degree. I had no idea that grad school existed though at that point, honestly. I just, thought just go to a good school. So I applied to a bunch of chemistry programs actually, and I got lots of rejections. Um, But I actually got admitted into UC Merced, which wasn't even in my radar at first. But super happy that I did. It was a great program, or great school, and specifically great applied mathematics program, which I switched to after the first year. I was like, you know what? I think I want to go for a more um, like, 'cause I actually in the beginning, the only reason why I applied to chemistry programs is because I thought I wanted to be a pharmacist. um, and turns out I learned pretty quickly, like, pharmacy is not the life for me, but that's just me. Um, I felt more attracted to mathematics at the time, because I loved how general it was. I loved how, like, it's just the language of that we communicate and across all sciences. So I thought that was really cool. And then in that the summer after my first year, I got this basically coding boot camp fellowship. So it was like 3 weeks of intense, like learning how to code and writing your first programs in MATLAB, in R, which is a statistics programming language, and and a couple others. I think Java might have been one of them as well. But it was really awesome. It was my first time coding, and that was when it was really like, oh man, I really like this coding stuff. And then I also did my first research program. I studied Newton's method, which, if you go on to in STEM, I'm sure you'll learn about it. Um, it's a numerical method. I'm not going to go too far into it, but the next another another thing that happened was that in 2016 of spring, I won a poster award at a statewide um, conference, where I presented this research that I did the summer after my freshman year on Newton's method, and I won one of the top like poster awards. And that same day, I one of the poster judges happened to be super interested in my presentation, and he asked me, hey, I'd love for you to come work for me at UC Santa Barbara in the next summer. So that's exactly what I did. Um, I there at UCSB, I wrote a MATLAB program that solves the Poisson equation, which is a PDE, partial differential equation. And I published my first paper as first author in the Journal of Computational Physics, which is kind of wild. I was only in my second year in my undergrad. So I don't know. I felt like ever since, you know, starting the research journey, it just kind of snowballed. I just kept uh, trying new things. So in the next year, I actually switched my interests to, I thought, you know what, I want to be even more applied. I want to look at renewable energy. And so I applied to this and got into this NASA funded fellowship, and I grew what's called carbon nanotubes on carbon fiber cloths for fuel cell applications. And in the picture there, after presenting my poster at the Macy's um, research symposium, uh, I actually got to meet Tamara. She was um, actually one of the first women to spacewalk in space. So she is an astronaut, and so I got to meet her. It was really awesome. Um, and so the summer after that, I was able to go to NASA Langley Research Center. I the mentor that I worked for this Macy's fellowship, actually one day just emailed me. I'll never forget this. She just emailed me out of the blue, and she was like, "Hey, do you want to go to NASA this summer for an internship? You should apply." And I was like, "Okay, great." And so I did, and she put me directly in contact with someone who actually I ended up working with. So I think the theme here is, for me at least, is just like, um, definitely just applying, and then making connections and and one thing led me to another. And then next thing you know, I'm doing 4 consecutive internships at NASA Langley, which is in Hampton, Virginia, for those of you who are curious. I studied boron nitride nanotubes for space radiation shielding applications. Um, so again, so that picture actually on the very top right is me. It was a very candid photo. I didn't realize there was someone there taking a photo, but that's me talking to one of the famous hidden figures, um, Mary Jackson. Oh, sorry. And yeah, so it was just an absolute thrill to meet her. And I was holding actually the book in hand. I had the book because I knew she was coming, and I couldn't get an autograph, but I was able to at least just tell her like how much her story really impacted me. So then I graduated a year after, went back to school. This picture here is me. I was the student speaker for the commencement speaker for UC Merced, and that was really exciting and a great honor. Um, and then I started my mechanical engineering PhD program um, at UIUC, where I am right now. And I am now currently a NASA Space Technology Graduate Research Opportunities Fellowship. And as part of this amazing fellowship, I get to go to different NASA centers. So I'm definitely continuing on this path to become, I think, a NASA research scientist or slash research engineer. We'll see what the title is really, but yeah, so that's definitely the track for I'm on the NASA track. Um, but it definitely took a lot of like twists and turns and just trying new stuff to get there. I think the internships at NASA Langley was super pivotal for me in realizing like, okay, this is what I want to be working on. Space technology is my passion. Um, so yeah, I think that is it for me.
Clap. Thank you so much, Victoria. That was very inspiring and amazing journey to look at. I may have forgotten to mention in the beginning that if you have questions throughout the panel here, you can put them in the chat and we'll collect them so we can ask them in the end. But other than that, I think we'll ask our questions in the end. And for now, we'll have Tanya um, set up for her part of this panel. So Tanya grew up in Ames in Iowa, and she attended Ames High School, where she was a member of the band, orchestra, and school newspaper. So she had a lot of involvement already. She went on to earn her bachelor's in mechanical engineering from MIT and her PhD from Stanford recently. Congratulations. And so right now she's a postdoc scholar at Stanford studying heat transfer and water desalination. And so Tanya and I are both graduate students or were graduate students in POETS, which is a collaborative research institution between UIUC, Stanford, University of Arkansas, and I may be forgetting a fourth institution.
And Howard.
And Howard, thank you. And Howard. So it's a great institution that lets us collaborate with other people and get a lot of cool research done. So with that, I'll give Tanya the floor.
All right, thanks for that introduction and also for having me today. So I thought I'd start off by this is just summarizing, I guess if you look at from, when I was born. So I was born in Potsdam, New York. This is a picture of me. I'm the tiny one, and then that's my older sister carrying me. And then the rest of my life, I kind of moved around a little bit, but high school and middle school, I grew up mostly in Ames, Iowa. And so that was where I went to high school. And then as Ariel stated, I went on to get my bachelor's in mechanical engineering at MIT. And then I finished my PhD recently at Stanford. And now I'm still at Stanford doing my postdoc in civil and environmental engineering. So a slight switch in terms of departments. So I guess this is, if you were to kind of separate my life events just based on more of a resume format. But in the next part, I kind of wanted to talk about what my interests were along the way. So I would say growing up and also in high school, most of my interests were not necessarily focused on STEM. heavily. Like our school did not have, really specialized programs. I think there's a lot of high schools now that have, you can take computer science classes, you can do robotics competitions. Those are just things that I was not aware of or was not, as widespread. And I was really into music. So I spent a lot of time on that. I was in orchestra, I played violin, and then I also played oboe in orchestra for a while, also oboe in band. So I spent a lot of time, kind of on not really STEM related things, and then being a part of the school newspaper, also not STEM related. But then I think in high school, I had just more interest in kind of some of my math and science classes. And then literally when I was applying for college, I was like, mechanical engineering seems to be one of the broadest majors, so I should just pick it. And then, it'll give me kind of a chance to figure out what I'm interested in. And then I think when I actually got to college, that was true because I was like, there are many things that fall into this very broad category of mechanical engineering. And now I need to figure out, what part of this is something that I actually want to study. So you have kind of like product design, which a lot of people go into, working for Apple, working for these companies that are making industrial products. Heat transfer was something I was like kind of interested in, but didn't know very much about. And then I was really interested for a while in cars and automobiles. And so I did an internship actually at Ford one summer, but then ended up deciding maybe that wasn't for me after all. Nothing against the internship. I think it was just something that I had been kind of interested in, but then, internships are a great way to also test it out more deeply and see if that is really what you want to end up doing. And so specifically, I think that didn't end up being kind of my primary interest, but I did end up figuring out that I do like heat transfer. And so for my PhD, that was really what became my focus. And so for my PhD, I studied electronics cooling. So basically, how do we remove heat from, small semiconductor devices that get really hot and generate a lot of heat and become inefficient in their operation? And that's also a big part of kind of what this collaborative center of poets that Ariel was talking about focuses on. And then finally, as I moved on to my postdoc, I wanted to kind of take, what I've learned from heat transfer and maybe apply it to a different space. So the PhD is like everything gets very, very narrow and you become very focused in one particular area. And so I wanted to try and broaden back out a little bit. So now I'm working on water desalination, which is still a heat and mass transfer problem. So I'm still using kind of a lot of the things I learned, but very different application, no longer looking at semiconductors specifically. And then to conclude, I also wanted to talk about, what were some of my takeaways from these different steps in my education so far, I guess, for my training up until this point. So I think in high school, at least, a lot of it, just from a pure academic standpoint, is, there's kind of a set goal that you're aiming for. You want to graduate, you want that degree. If you want to go to college, there are certain schools that you're aiming for, that you're applying for. And so there's kind of a very set range of defined goals that you can aim for at high school. And then what I learned upon entering college is that everyone is coming from very, very different levels of backgrounds. And so as an example, like having graduated high school, I felt like I had completed all the requirements up until that point. I get into college and people are coming with all sorts of different experience in, lots of subjects that I hadn't had a chance to learn yet. So as an example, in my sophomore year, we had a robotics competition that was like supposed to be the intro to, I think, learning some basic machining processes in mechanical engineering, but it's just like a straight up competition where you're supposed to build a robot that's going to battle against other people. And like, I had never machined anything in my life. I had no exposure to any of this stuff, and I had no idea what I was doing. And so sometimes, it can be intimidating to be faced against other people who, in high school or before that may have had opportunities to really become super specialized. Sometimes people have coding classes as early as middle school, but it's also okay, I think, is what I want to get across, is that even if your backgrounds as you're getting to this point may not be at the same place, it's still a place where, you know, everyone has something to learn. And even if you're not coming from somewhere where you've had a chance to kind of have some of that knowledge ahead of time, you can still get there. You know, there's a chance for everyone to kind of relearn and gain exposure to all these new topics in college. And then finally, I think grad school and postdoc, moving more into research and kind of the academic space, has been more about just trying to answer lots of different questions. And sometimes those questions are very specific and oftentimes leads to just kind of a chain of more and more questions that you need to answer. Because I think what I've learned is that research is never really finished. You know, you can answer one question, but there's always more questions that arise. But that's also part of what kind of keeps it interesting. So if that's something that you're interested in, then I think that's kind of a good fit for a potential research career. So I think with that, that concludes my presentation part of it. So should I stop sharing my screen and then we can move on to the other questions?
Sure. Yeah, we can continue the Q&A portion with just our faces. All right. So thank you, Tanya, for that great spiel about your journey and the advice on kind of choosing your path and being okay with where you are compared to everyone else. And thank you again, Victoria, for your insights as well. So we're going to be moving into the question and answer portion of our event. I think it's always easier if someone starts it off with a question while everyone is thinking. So how this works is if you want to put in your question in the chat, feel free to do so, and then I'll read it out loud. But our attendance is a little bit smaller today anyway, so I think if you do want to say your question out loud as well, you can use the raise hand feature, and then we can you can ask it yourself. But to start it out, I guess we can ask a question that will be for both of you, and that would be so what do you love most about your field of study and your chosen field of study? You can choose however you want to answer that. Or maybe Victoria can go first.
I'll go ahead. Yeah. Actually, recently I had a moment where I was talking with my PhD advisor. Well, I'm actually co-advised, so one of my PhD advisors. And I was discussing something about one of the basically an issue I'm having with one of my codes, right? And she was kind of joking, oh, if only like there was this part of the code that did it for you. I can't really explain the specifics, but she basically she wanted to say that like that's a joke because we're on the frontier of science. Like there's nothing to go off from because it hasn't been done before. And I think that's something super special about I think maybe more in a general sense about research, especially if you continue on to a PhD and to higher education, you're gonna find yourself like, oh, there's not a lot of knowledge on this specific area of research, and you literally you're pushing the edges of where science can go. And I think maybe more specific to what I do, I think I especially love the fact that at the end of the day, what we're trying to accomplish is, at least because I study, I try to improve models that can predict how heat shield materials perform under really extreme environments, specifically under the extreme environment of re-entering Earth's atmosphere. So if you can think about a space shield, or space vehicle re-entering Earth's atmosphere, it's just a ball of fire, well, plasma, because it just ignites in Earth's atmosphere because it's traveling at such incredibly fast speeds. So there's extreme heat, extreme loads. So these really extreme conditions that you don't really find anywhere else, right? Like it's not on Earth, not really anywhere else except for that very specific environment of re-entering Earth's atmosphere. So just trying to improve models that can predict how these heat shield materials perform, and just to make sure that they don't fail. Like it's a pretty I don't know, it's like kind of a lot of pressure maybe, but it's so funny because like on a day-to-day basis I'm just sitting behind a screen and coding. But it's nice to remind myself that like really this is potentially work um, that contributes towards materials and technologies that can help protect lives, astronauts lives as they're re-entering um, Earth's atmosphere in these really extreme environments. So that's always really fun to think about.
Thank you. And Tanya, what about you? What do you love most about your field of study?
So I like the fact, I think, that I work in kind of a more applied space. So I guess kind of like what Victoria was saying, you get to see a lot of immediate impacts of your work, and it's never hard to find motivation for it. Especially right now working on desalination, that's kind of a huge global crisis. And it's hard to imagine, me as one person, am I going to solve that problem by myself? Like, obviously not. But it also does feel fulfilling that these are things that you can be constantly thinking about every day and, trying to find ways to at least contribute a little bit to helping some of these issues.
Thank you. Um, and then moving on, so you both have pretty different paths that got you to where you are today. So this is a bit of a two-parter, but mostly because it's different questions for you too. Victoria, so you said that a really pivotal role in your career was that first internship that you got at NASA. And then from then on, you kind of made use of your professional network to get a lot of different opportunities, which is really good. So, can you expand more on how you developed your professional relationships? Because, they played a big role in your academic journey.
Yeah, I think um, for me, I think I just kind of went for it, not went for whether it was like because I had the option to present at a conference or not. I had the option to go to NASA or not. I had the option to apply to something completely different because I was doing math research before. Um, and then I switched to doing more like chemistry or materials research. So in the lab, never not really knowing what I was doing. In fact, I've never taken a materials course, um, which is interesting. But yeah, so I think kind of just for me, I think what made it easier to network and make those connections was just kind of like ignoring those doubting those, like I wasn't really limiting myself, I think. I was just like, oh, I feel like it could have gone like a completely different way if I had started with that chemistry major and then just like was like, okay, this is my life now. Like so what if I don't really like it? Like I'll just be a pharmacist, I think it really took me just kind of like going for it. Like I don't know really much about mathematics, but I'm gonna go for it. Or, I don't really know much about materials research, but I'm gonna go for it. I think learning as you go, putting in the work, and then demonstrating that you you know how to learn something very broadly, but you know how to learn something and do research and get some good results, and especially in my case, um, I think knowing how to present and talk about your research has been maybe what's set me apart because that's how that first, at that poster conference that I talked about before, where that poster judge was like, hey, like you are really good at explaining this research, and you seem really passionate about it. I'd like for you to work for me. So that kind of like happened again when I was told, I was emailed by my mentor when I was doing materials research. She basically said, hey, I like your work. I see you in lab working, putting in the work, and I would like you to represent, my group at NASA. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. So really you just have to kind of go for it despite what you may believe you're unqualified for, even if you are probably qualified for it. Have that confidence. Thank you. And then as for Tanya, so a lot of our conversation up until now has been about doing research in the academic or I guess NASA as a lab capacity, but you also had experience in industry working your Ford internship. So how would you say that those experiences in STEM are different for students who may not know? Because I think up until you were in that space you working either in industry or doing research, you don't quite know what's what and what the difference is.
I will say I think it still depends really strongly on the company. And my experiences are also limited from the perspective of like a summer internship. So, when you go do the internship, they're going to give you kind of a limited, very small portion of a project that you can feasibly complete in a short amount of time, and then hopefully like not mess up an actual employee's project while you're doing it. I think a key difference, and also why I've enjoyed the academic research side a little bit more, is that there is still a lot more freedom, I would say, in academic research. It's more open-ended questions that you're trying to address. In terms of industry, like almost always there is kind of a product that needs to be sold, or there's like a certain target that needs to be met. And there's kind of a lot of other, I don't know if it's necessarily rules, but just kind of guides along the way that are directing exactly what you're researching. But I mean, that's not to say that companies don't do really cutting edge research, because they really do. And a lot of the times, they have great funding to do that. But I think the scope is oftentimes more determined by someone at a very much higher up level. That's been kind of my takeaway from it.
Mm-hmm. So you have a lot, relatively more control over the technical work you're doing in academic research.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay. Pivoting slightly, do you have a typical workday? And if you do, what is that like?
I'll go ahead. So I wish it were more structured than it currently is. I'll say that. Quarantine didn't help with that. But typical workday for me is now, because we're able to come back into our office spaces and in our labs, I go to my desk, which is like right next to a bunch of other graduate students. So uh, it's just like a big room full of graduate students that are also working. So it's it's actually a really good environment to be in. And I am coding. I would have been, walking around engineering campus prior to COVID. I would have been, you know, going to different meetings across the engineering campus. But now everything's on Zoom. So I am in and out of Zoom meetings on a typical day, but not too many, thankfully. And yeah, I think that's basically it. I am just coding. I try to work outside when I can, if the weather's nice. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I clock in probably, I mean, I don't literally clock in don't get me like there is no that is the thing about grad life, is that there's no clock in, clock out time. Usually it's usually just like maybe like culture based depending on the lab. You know, if your advisor expects you to be in by a certain time or get a certain amount of hours done, then you know, it'll be really dependent on that. But in my case, my advisor is very hands off, and so I can walk in and walk out whenever I want, as long as I get the work that is expected to be done. So usually for me, I'm in between 10 and like 10 a.m. and like 6, 7 p.m. I try not to work outside of at night, you know, and late into the night, but you know, sometimes it does happen with deadlines and stuff. So, um, yeah, that's a typical day for me.
I think mine's pretty similar. Like, not a lot has changed since going from a student to being a postdoc. And it's part of also what I love about being in academia is kind of, you know, freedom to dictate your own schedule. And I mean, I like working a regular schedule anyway. So I typically try to work between like 8:30 to 5:30-ish, and then I don't do a ton of work after those hours. Uh, I don't have a lot of meetings most of the time. I think that's pretty different from what I hear about my friends who are working in industry, is there's like a lot of time spent on meetings and like communicating with other people. I guess a lot of my work is kind of just self-directed, like I'm the main person responsible for something. So I mostly just spend my day either doing stuff on the computer, like simulations to try to figure out things for my experiments, or I'm actually working in lab trying to take measurements.
Thank you. Thank you. Sounds like you both have a pretty good work-life balance. Um, Pivoting off of that, so it seems like you must have some free time. When you were an undergrad or grad school, or even before that, did you find that there were organizations or extracurricular activities that helped you either de-stress or build a professional network, gain other skills?
Yeah, I was maybe a little over involved in undergrad, and I only say that because I mean I loved all of the, you know, organizations I was a part of, um, but I was also working you know, part time, school full time, and trying to do like a bunch of you know, leadership roles in different organizations, mostly professional organizations. So I'm gonna sound like a huge nerd, but I mean, of course, aren't we all here? So I was a part of Society of Physics Students.
SPS. SPS, sorry.
SPS, yeah, yeah. So I helped start an SPS chapter at UC Merced. And yeah, so I had my physics friends and physics network. I loved the physics professors at my UC Merced campus. Um, So it was honestly, so sort of like SPS, same thing with SOCNUS, Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science or in STEM. Um, and then there's also SHIP, Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. Those, oh, and one more, Society of Industrial and Applied Mathematics. That one made a lot of sense because I was an applied mathematics major in undergrad. All really awesome organizations, but they all in common, they all brought me like closer to what I was interested, like closer to really it like expanded my view of like what people are doing in physics and engineering and in math. And it allowed me to, you know, through going to conferences or maybe talking to other chapters at different universities, um, yeah, I just got like a really nice big view of like what people are doing um, in those fields, and made some really great friends, made some really great connections, and also got to talk to um, got to connect to a bunch of professors as well at my university. So super awesome. Oh, and then of course outreach opportunities like this. I was pretty involved in those, in each of those organizations. So
I was not nearly as involved as Victoria. I was not in any professional organizations. But the one thing that I did keep constant from high school and even through my PhD was music. I just think it's always been like a nice thing to do outside of lab work or school or whatever, it's, if you're like stressed about something, it's really nice to have something else to put your time and energy in. And so I did chamber music in college and also at Stanford. And it's also a really nice way to meet people and have friends. I guess, yeah, I was also part of a sorority in college, it was just a nice way to also, I think, meet people and socialize and think about things other than school. And I still have a lot of really great friends today that I met through that. So, yep.
Thank you. It's very interesting that you have such different involvement backgrounds. Um, let's see. What else was I thinking of? So obviously we touched on your professional networks. I think we might have an audience of mostly undergraduate students for now. So I was wondering, who were your mentors as you were going through your career path, or did you have any mentors that really made an impact on your career?
I personally had a ton of mentors. Um, I I think when I first learned about what research was, it was like this workshop that I went to that was offered to undergrads to learn more about the research programs that are available through the school. And so that's where I first heard about research. I had no idea like that it existed and or what it was. But it was pitched to me by these two, they're like program coordinators, and those two really, I think, I they they took a chance with me because I was just a freshman, or I was applying when I was finishing up my first year in college to these research programs, and they gave me a shot. I think they told me that they had never admitted any freshmen, uh, uh, college students into the research programs. Um, but um, yeah, those two have been, um, they were with me throughout my entire undergrad career, and then every single professor or mentor that I worked with throughout like a summer internship or program, each of them have been a mentor to me. I still keep in contact with them, um, especially my NASA mentor, because I worked throughout those 4 internships that I had at NASA. I was with the same person. I was studying under the same person. We just grew super close, and he is probably like my number one mentor. He like definitely has had my back, um, and yeah, very happy that I have him and have had really great mentors.
Yeah, I think my mentors, starting out, even in high school, I had some really great teachers who were super inspirational. So that was kind of a really nice launching point. And then in college, both my undergraduate research advisor and I had a really great undergraduate course advisor as well. And so having those experiences of, having just someone who's up there who can really like talk to you, actually listen to your questions and give feedback, I think is super valuable. And so that's also kind of continued this positive experience. And then going into grad school, of course, there's my PhD advisor, there's my co-advisor, they're all there to be in that mentorship role. But I think what's also been really critical has been older students, like fellow PhD students, maybe people who've been there a few years before me, actually played, I think, a really critical mentorship role, especially when I was just starting off with independent research. And I think, yeah, that's also been a really important part for me.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like there are a lot of people that really help us out throughout our graduate careers, and it's really great to see that there are a lot of people who have helped you out on yours. So we're nearing the end of our time here, and I want to end this Q&A and panel off with one last question. Um, a little bit more of a retrospective, I would say. And that is, what would be the key piece of advice you would tell your past self from when you were graduating high school, let's say, and been about to go into college? What would you say is the most important piece of advice you could give yourself?
That one's tough. um, I'm sorry, wait, advice to when you were like applying to college, or just like in general, like when you were about to graduate, or
When you're about to graduate, or you're kind of at that crossroads of
yeah,
applying and going to college, yeah.
yeah. Um, I would tell myself probably to just um to not be discouraged by all the rejections you're about to get and just, keep going. Um yeah, which I guess I did, but it did take a pretty big toll on me mentally. Um, putting in so much work in high school to try and, get into the best school, and then literally getting almost all rejections. And then actually, UC Merced, the only reason why they actually reached out to me. I didn't originally apply to UC Merced. They sent me an email saying, and I almost missed it too, but I was going back through my emails, and they sent me an email saying, "Hey, we noticed that you applied to a bunch of UCs, and you didn't get in. You can come here if you want." They were like, if you want to, they were just accepting people um, um, because they're a brand new school. I think when I was admitted, it was only like it had only been open for like 5 or 6 years. So super new school. I think they were just trying to get people to come. So they were kind of just accepting, they had that program. Forgot what it was called, but yeah. And I really took that, I think, personally. And like I almost didn't want to go there, so I didn't want to feel um, um, like I was only there because they felt bad for me. That's kind of like the attitude I had at the very beginning. And I wish I could just go back and tell myself, like, don't worry, like it's gonna work out. Um, you know, yeah, don't worry, it's gonna work out. Don't let this don't let this dictate how your self-worth. Basically, don't tie like the name of the school, or like how many exceptions or rejections you get. Don't let that tie to your self-worth, because they're completely independent. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I think for me, it would be, I guess, kind of similar to what I touched on in my presentation. Like, just don't let yourself be intimidated by people who seem like they're already so much more ahead than you. It's okay. Like, everyone is very far behind in some way or the other. Like everyone's got lots of stuff to learn, and eventually you can all kind of equalize again. I think that would be the biggest thing. And also I think to just like not try to plan out too much of what exactly you want everything to look like every step of the way. It's okay to just go with it, or, you know, kind of have shorter term goals, and you don't have to have this really huge thing that everything you're doing is contributing exactly to that final goal, because that's very stressful and I think almost never exactly works out that way.
Yeah, that's very good advice from both of you. Thank you so much. I think I also learned a lot from your academic journeys that I'll take into account as I go through grad school as well. But for now, I think that would be the end of our event. Thank you so much to our panelists and to our guests for coming. I hope that you got a lot out of this, like I did as well. We are recording this event, so very soon there will be a recording up on the website if you want to look back and share this with anyone who might learn from it, or look back at some of the answers that were given out. But yeah, other than that, this was an event co-hosted by poets and by Nano Heat at Stanford. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Good
Thanks,
luck,
everyone.
everyone.